Blog Talk Radio.
I'm Howard Hecht.
I'm Fred McClimans.
And you are listening to The Coil. Today we're taking a bit of a different turn on The Coil, and we're going to talk about spirituality. Now, before you go running for that dial, we're talking about technology and spirituality and how the two are intermingling and interplaying, because let's face it, technology is everywhere and spirituality is not going away. What's really happening between them? I mean, Fred, one of the places that I see people adopting a tremendous spiritual devotion is to their mobile devices. I mean, it sounds laughable, but let's face it, there are people who have an iPhone who would not think about leaving it. It's a talisman. It's their conduit to a deeper meaning, and they would not go anywhere without it. You're one of them. I never see you without that thing. And here, and I am of another spiritual axis holding an Android device. Now, we get along very well in spite of that because, usually, but put it this way, I don't think we ever fought about that, but I see a lot of people that do. There are a lot of people that really come to some very serious verbal altercations about their choice of mobile device because it's that important to them on that deep of a level.
Yeah. Well, I think first off, you're underestimating the level of discussion and disagreement that we've had over, Apple versus Google and Apple versus Microsoft. But you're right. In many ways, I'm not going to go out and say that we actually worship technology, but we've become so dependent on technology. And for many people, because they don't necessarily understand the underlying technology, it's still somewhat magical. It works. It does something that they don't quite understand how it actually makes happen. In that regard, I think that there's a bit of mysticism about technology, very much in the same way that 5,000 years ago or even 500 years ago, we may have seen something that took place or that we witnessed something that we couldn't quite understand. Well, it must have come from the gods. Well, in this case here, we're looking at technology and it definitely has become mystical. I think there's also another issue here, and that is that the way technology is being marketed today, it's very important for people to belong. And especially in today's environment where, there's so much activity going on and people can very easily get lost in the technical flow of things. I think it's one of those situations where, look at companies like Apple that have created a cult around, all things Mac, not just amongst their employees, but also amongst their consumers.
Well, look, of course, what we're doing is we're not actually purchasing a technology. We're purchasing a golden ticket into an ecosystem. And
yes,
the ecosystem, the dreaded ecosystem, in which we're expected to reside. And this is where I get into my issue, which is the surrogacy issue. I mean, if I reside in this ecosystem, I get a lot of the community, and I feel the oneness. I feel a plans to the opportunities to be present in my ecosystem and commune with my fellows. However, am I really? I mean, because spirituality to me has always implied a deep level of introspection, and I think that technology is not necessarily the best way to do that.
No, it's not yet in many ways. And certainly, though, I can imagine right now that there's somebody listening to us right now thinking, I can build an app for that. And I mean, let's face it, there is an app for almost everything, and if there's not one yet, there will be soon. So the idea of using technology to achieve spirituality in a deeper sense, vendors are certainly trying to change the behavior of their consumers to instill in them this, devotion, to their technology. So it's out there.
It's definitely out there,
yeah.
And that's the thing is I'm concerned that it's not in here. So that's what I worry about.
Yeah. So let me ask you. I know you live in Canada. And so let me ask, we've both been, various places around the world. Do you see a difference in the way people approach technology from a cultural perspective? Because
absolutely,
let's face it, not everybody in the world is yet on Facebook, and you can actually survive without being, devoted to all things Zuck.
It's true, but not well. You can. It's a subsistence sort of living. No, truthfully, it's not as cut and dry as it once was, because there is a mad rush to join that. I mean, people are signing on to technology in a huge way, and when it's available, people are diving in deeply. But what I'm very curious about, and I'm starting to watch this, is in places with a more either homogenous or centered spirituality, than large Western societies, particularly the U.S. and Canada, or especially some of the European societies where spirituality has actually sort of gone in decline intentionally. Where they're very much, where the state-oriented things have actually supplanted spirituality in a lot of rather purposeful ways. I've seen things go in, and the desire is so intent. And it's fascinating to watch in countries where, particularly where spirituality had almost been outlawed. I mean, look, in China, I won't say it's been outlawed, but certainly diminished greatly, and certainly not in,
from a policy perspective.
From a policy perspective.
Yeah, similar to the Soviet Union.
Former Soviet Union.
The former Soviet Union, yeah.
It's not around anymore. They're done now.
So, Howard, during a recent edition of The Coil, we had Dr. Katina Michael from the University of Wollongong on.
Absolutely, one of our great guests.
She was, and she asked a great question during one of our breaks, which is the subject of today's edition of The Coil.
And we got her to ask it again, and we actually sat down and tried to answer it.
We did indeed.
And that's going to be what we're going to hear when we come back. Dr. Katina Michael and the big question, right after this.
We tend to look at technology issues from the physical, from the virtual, but have we missed out the spiritual and what makes us human? My question to you is, how much of the new emerging technologies will challenge us as spiritual beings?
Wow, that is a brilliant question, and I actually think about that in the context of the fact that emerging technologies tend to have what I believe, in many cases, to be a very negative effect on our spiritual selves, because depending on your spiritual beliefs, the one thing that almost all belief systems do hold is that they require presence. They require you to live in the moment. That's certainly a fundamental thing, in Buddhism, but it's also a fundamental thing, when you talk about the call to prayer in Islam, when you talk about going into, the minyan in the Jewish faith, going to Mass, all require presence. And what we're doing is we are obscuring presence with most of the emerging technologies. And the other thing is, when you take just sort of the, I hate to say generic, but let's say non-faith-based spirituality, they also don't really allow a lot of space. And by space, I mean the place for quiet introspection. It's quite one thing to be able to sit and listen to music and allow yourself to go into an introspective, hopefully prolonged introspective, let's say, trance. But it's quite another when you're very busy interacting with Pandora or Spotify and letting everyone know about every damn song you're listening to. And, I really, people who tell, the fact that you've told me that you've listened to 4 Nickelback tracks is almost enough to get you defriended in my book. That's one more than the lifetime maximum. But how does that really, let us go? I mean, emerging technologies in many cases don't let us exist with art. They don't let us exist with the experience of culture, or just simply, again, being alone with our own thoughts. So I think the effect is going to be very negative, because really what we're talking about is the humanistic element, and the more we abdicate those functions to technology, the less time we have for that. I mean, I know less and less people who are even comfortable being unplugged for prolonged periods of time. So I don't think that they do, and I don't think it's actually the responsibility of those technologies. It's the responsibility of we as individuals to reclaim that space.
That was deep, Howard. I'm going to be a lot less deep. I'm going to be a lot more shallow on this one. I mean, it's a good question. Spirituality and technology. You know, I think that Arthur Clarke had a great line. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, and that has been true throughout human existence. New technology has always forced us to rethink our role in the world. It's led us to question our long-held beliefs, including religious beliefs, and we've always had to kind of adapt to that. And I think the interesting thing is today, being spiritual for many people is less about a traditional religion and perhaps more about the beliefs that shape their lives. So I think it's very possible for somebody to be very spiritual in regard to some societal element in their lives, or to their business venture, or the type of business they're in. I mean, these are things that increasingly define who we are. And I think as technology moves, what we're seeing is we're having to rethink our beliefs, not just about religion, but about our role in the world, and how what we do on a daily basis needs to evolve. And that's a very big challenge for people. You just look at the last 10 years and how the internet has taken off and how social media has taken off. Look at how many people are now sitting on the other side of a very unexpected digital divide. People that have not made the transition or will be unable to make the transition. Look at the services and the accessibility to things that they used to have 10 years ago that they will not have in another 10 years. That's going to force those people to rethink their lives. And it's going to force a lot of us in society to rethink our lives and how much we're willing to accept disenfranchising certain portions of our society because we're now doing something that might be for the greater good, which is very spiritual, just not in a religious way. So yes, I think that the technology is definitely changing our view of spirituality, excuse me, and it's forcing us to rethink, and questioning is always a good thing. So there's my very shallow answer.
Did you just say I was going to be spiritually aligned with a business venture? Did you actually just say that?
Yes. And think about it. There are people.
We are doomed.
There are people whose mindset.
We are doomed.
Well, maybe Howard. Maybe we are. But there are people whose mindset is so in tune with what they're doing. They approach their job with a very spiritual, religious fervor.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's. It's one of those things that I think, and this is purely my opinion, but I believe we're probably seeing more of that today than we have in the past, because the ability for somebody to choose or to not say choose, but to find their ideal fit, their ideal job, their role in society and business and so forth, is much greater than it was, 100 years ago, when your career choices were extremely limited based on where you were, your socioeconomic status. Today you have access to so many more ideas, so many more job possibilities.
Do I really? That
you do.
Then why is everyone being coerced into becoming a coder? Why is everyone being told you don't even need to go to university anymore? You should just become a coder. And why are they actually opening up guild-like medieval intern practices? I can't. In all the major cities in the U.S., they're opening up these medieval guild-like practices where they create these apprenticeships, where you're actually taking people out of high school and dropping them into entrepreneurial roles, and they're not turning into rounded human beings.
Well, go back even further. What is it?
I did. I went back to the Dark Ages. That's what we're redoing.
No. Yeah. Well, so Dark Ages. Go back to Albania. I think it's either Albania or Estonia. I can't remember which. They're actually teaching their school kids how to code in first grade.
I'm sure that would be a stone.
Mandatory classes on how to code. They want to be the outsourcing country of the world. A really odd concept. And you're right. There are certainly a lot of pushes to go back to the apprenticeship, to rediscover the art of the mentor in our culture. And there are people who very plainly say you don't need a college degree. What you need to do is you need to get a job. And if that job is going to be in technology, which is where the majority of jobs are for many people, here's what you need to know. So go learn it and go do. And actually, that fits still as a role, but I'm not convinced that that's a great thing necessarily, because coding will change. And if you're just teaching somebody how to code one particular thing, and you're not teaching them the basic critical thinking that's required to actually figure out how to really express yourself in code and how to move beyond one language to the next and one concept to the next, then I think it's very short-sighted. And that is a problem. That is a huge problem. But I will still stand fast. The number of potential jobs that you can now uncover and explore is much greater than it was, simply by the fact that you have much more knowledge of those. You may not be able to pursue them all, but you're now aware of them.
It's true. McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's, Subway, Kentucky Fried Chicken. You have so many more possibilities.
That Horton guy in Canada? Come on.
Don't pick on Tim. Do not mess with Tim Horton.
Hey, I once told somebody that Tim Hortons donuts were not the best donuts in the world, and you would have thought that I was Trey Parker and Matt Stone blaming Canada for everything.
I don't know if they're going to allow you back up here now.
Yes, well, be that as it may.
Spiritually aligned with your startup. Anyway.
That's the beauty of this. I mean, Dave McClure, yes. McClure did a great, yes. He did a great thing. In fact, no, it wasn't even him. There was somebody else who did one that was even better. They had this basic chart for how they were going to select what ventures to invest in, and it was essentially the three asses that they were looking at. And it's a very simple model, but you had to have all three, wild ass idea, hardcore ass team, and big ass market, and so forth. And those may not be the actual three.
Wow, that's just like really reading the Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah. But what's interesting there is in talking to a lot of venture capitalists and a lot of investors, I increasingly see a business model working itself into very common application where if they don't have a core group of people around that team that religiously believe in that, they eat it, they sleep it, they drink it 24/7. If they don't have that, they go, you know what? I can find somebody else that does.
Was that based on Kierkegaard's The Three Asses, or was that Kant who did The Three Asses? I forget which. Or maybe it was Heidegger. I don't know.
Yes. And the three fates with asses. Go figure. I knew you would derail that somewhere.
Sorry, Katina.
Katina, this is what I put up with every day.
This is actually not what we're going to have our fight about. That's the best part.
I love it. The thing is, the whole idea of what both of you are saying fits very nicely in with my notion that technology is becoming society. We are uniting with technology. And so can you separate the business venture from a way of life? Can you separate the embedded surveillance device that's implanted in you from yourself, your personhood? Especially if you're someone who needs a heart pacemaker and can't live without one. But the spiritual component, I think, is becoming confused within this embeddedness, within this fusion, within the fact that humans are no longer just society, but technology becomes society. We become technology. We coalesce. We're inseparable. We cannot distinguish the arm from the chip or the brain-computer interface from the brain. And that's the difficulty with that question. A little bit of another setup on both of you, but Howard, I believe deeply what you say is true, but the problem of why we're at that point is because of what Fred is saying, because, technology has become the new religion. It's the new cult. And we don't even know it. We're not talking about citizens following, their favorite football team in a stadium and going crazy, for example, like they do in London when they're playing soccer matches, or during the Super Bowl in gridiron in the US, or in hockey in Canada, for example. We're talking about technology becoming that new god. And this is the problem, whether it's business processes, it's a venture, whether you want to describe it as a chip, whether you want to describe it as your iPhone, which if you lose, you go more crazy than if you lose your own kid. Meaning you've lost them in the park, for example, rather than losing them altogether, of course. There is a distinction there, but people become more agitated when they're away from their iPhone than they are when they're away from their family. Doesn't matter if they're away from their family. If they're away from their iPhone, oh my goodness, So technology has become society. Technology is the new religion. Technology is a cult, has a cult following, and we are worshipping the technology, just like Fritz Lang's Metropolis.
Mm-hmm.
The machine is worshipped, and not only are we worshipping the machine, we're inviting it into our body now to govern us. So the spiritual component has become confused because we can't separate anymore our humanity from the technology, because the technology is always with us everywhere we go. And once we invite it into the body, then there's a whole another level of confusion, I think, that will occur. But the technology has become our new religion. It's the screens, it's the interactions with the medium rather than with what we are doing with it. And I don't know how much of a personal relationship you can have with your iPhone that's reciprocal, or with that embedded implant in your body. And that's where I was going with that question, because I think there's going to be a huge change in what we call human rights. It's going to be human techno-rights, not just human rights anymore. But by doing away with those human rights that we've held sacred for 2,000 plus years, I think we're going to do away with a lot more than we realize. We think we're going to rewrite the recorded history books with this new ethical paradigm that ignores everything about morality completely, but there are shortcomings. I think you remove human rights, you enter into a period of chaos, unless I don't know what's going to eventuate. Because technology is fallible; it's not infallible, and this is the nature of the beast, so to speak. When we talk about spirituality and technology.
Yeah, I think the thing that I most am concerned with right now is that, like, every human relationship has a power dynamic. You may work for someone may be your superior at work, but you get to go home. You get to turn that person off. I mean, they may be, occupying a place in your head that you don't really want them to, but you have the right to go away on holiday for 2 weeks and not think about them as much as possible. You have the space, as I said, to get away. So even in the most intimate of relationships, there's a power dynamic that allows one party or the other some space that they can create by exercising of that power. We seem to have forgotten where the off button is, and that's very, very dangerous. Mm-hmm. That's the part I'm tremendously concerned by.
Here's sort of a side thought on this. One of the things that has been a staple of sci-fi and now increasingly a staple of just standard medium, TV, movies, take your pick, is sort of the romantic view that we give to the cyborg, to the half human, half machine, to the implant. Even in cases, Terminator, fantastic series of movies that does something that's really interesting. You inject technology into this mix, and at the end, they have to give that technology the nice, warm, fuzzy thumbs up. They take Schwarzenegger's character, the Terminator, that starts out as this amazingly hideous yet brilliant killing machine that becomes human over time. And you see that time and time again. We're making implanted tech look good. And I think a lot of people are just they're just experiencing that and going, well, of course this is coming, and this is a good thing. We've been conditioned to think it's a good thing. Nobody's stopping to ask the question, what the hell are we doing to ourselves with this? And I've got a relative that has a pacemaker, and it's a life-saving device for that person. And I would love for that particular pacemaker, anybody's pacemaker for that matter, to be something that could be monitored remotely. When we're not with this person, I'm always thinking about the risk of something bad happening and how quickly could somebody respond. So there are clearly cases where we can do things that are good and beneficial for people, but we also have to understand, and I think perhaps accept the fact that there are going to be people who abuse that system. At some point, it's going to occur. We saw this at the last Olympics, where the Blade Runner, now turned blade thrower or something like that, sparked a great deal of controversy. What does it mean to compete in the Olympics, and should somebody that has artificial legs be allowed to compete? Well, just like we're all concerned about blood doping, today, in 10 years, we could very well be looking at a case where we find out somebody has something implanted that controls their heart rate better, that induces a bit of endorphin reaction in their body at a certain point, that gives them that extra edge of adrenaline. It's going to happen, and I don't think we're prepared to answer those questions yet. How do you react to that? We can't even agree how to deal with A-Rod and steroid use. Well, that made everybody quiet.
It did.
Okay, I retract it all.
No, too late. It's too late. You invoked the Terminator clause. Fred and I would like to offer our deepest thanks to our special guest, Dr. Katina Michael from the University of Wollongong in Australia, and to you for listening to this episode. Archived episodes of The Coil can be found on iTunes, Blog Talk Radio, and Buzzsprout.com. For more information on the show, please check out our website, thecoilradio.com, or follow us on Twitter @thecoilradio.